Trustee Secretary.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 4.2, and this is an item that comes to us via the Community Engagement Committee, but it's also going to be an opportunity for us today to share with the larger community the responses of Chief Kozoil with respect to some requests from members of our community with respect to policing policy. So I'd like to start out with a statement on how Mount Prospect's values are and respects our diversity in the community, and then I'll turn the floor over to the chief. And it's obvious my first statement is Mount Prospect does value its diversity. It's a key principle of our vision and our strategic plan to be an inclusive community that welcomes all. Having residents that are open and accepting, and being a community that values and respects differences. Our strategic plan mandates that we strive to learn from each other and have all residents feel comfortable with our village and each other. Our employees are held accountable for diversity training and behaviors. This is part of their individual reviews every year. Now, we've often heard the statistics that support our diversity. A third of our residents are foreign-born, and more than 40% of our households speak a language in addition to English at home. Yet we all know those statistics are only a partial measure of diversity. The Black and African American population is consistently one of the least represented in our census counts. It's not that we haven't welcomed Black residents, employees, and businesses. Velma Lowe served as our village clerk from 1998 until her death from cancer in 2005. Ross Rowe headed our TV services department before Howard did, and until Elk Grove Village enticed him away. 2 members of our Sister Cities Commission are Black, as is a former member of our zoning board. Reverend Clyde Brooks, head of the Illinois Commission on Diversity and Human Relations, now lives in Arlington Heights and once called Mount Prospect home, contributing to our Board of Fire and Police Commissioners and diversity efforts. The village has been an active and involved sponsor of his commission's Martin Luther King dinners, and we have Black-owned businesses in town, at least one of which has been here for more than 25 years. Despite this, I've always found it awkward that until this year, during my tenure as mayor, there hasn't been a logical recipient of our annual Black History Month proclamation. This year, thanks to the initiative of our clerk, Karen Agaranos, Prospect High School's Knights United organization attended and accepted the proclamation. I hope to establish additional dialogue with this group of students once school resumes, so we can learn more about the experience of growing up Black in Mount Prospect. Last week, a peaceful demonstration was held in the village. The participants mourned the death of George Floyd, caused by what our own police chief has called a criminal act. Attendees called for a re-examination of policing policies and shared firsthand experiences as Black community members. In the days surrounding the demonstration, I and the police chief, along with members of our board, received a number of emails asking us to sign on to the AIDS Can't Wait Pledge, the Path to Justice Pledge, or the Obama Mayor's Pledge. In addition, federal legislation, now backed up by an executive order, is being promulgated, and state legislation is being considered, aimed at changing policing policy mandates. Each of these pledges and proposals differs somewhat, and really they're a moving target at this time. It's hard to sign on one when there are competitors out there, and we really need to think through, as a nation, as a state, and as a municipality, all of the issues. There do appear, however, to be 8 common elements that have been demanding examination. During the funeral service for George Floyd, the mayor of Houston listed these 8 policy changes and committed to them. So a lot of the emails we got actually listed these 8 policy requests. And in reading Chief Kozoil's email replies to residents regarding these elements, and on which the board was copied, my pride grew in the strides our police department has been making and is continuing to make on these very policies, to the point that I wanted to make sure we shared the chief's response more broadly with the community. Last week, Palatine's police chief made such a presentation to its village board, and I think it's important that we hear from our chief as well tonight. Once we have an opportunity to hear from the chief, I'm tasking us all to consider going forward how to engage in a meaningful civil dialogue with our residents on the subject of conscious or unconscious bias, and how we can learn to better respect, understand, and accept each other. In the 1980s, one of my neighbors called the cops on my ComEd meter reader because he was Black. In the late 1990s, another neighbor called the cops because one of my son's Prospect High School friends was walking to our house while Black. I had hopes that in the intervening decades, our community had become more comfortable with the idea that we have Black residents and business people. Yet the firsthand stories told at the demonstration say our community has a way to go. In preparing tonight's remarks, I also learned that a Black Mount Prospect Public Works intern had the cops called on him 2 years ago. I guess the uniform shirt and the vehicle he was driving that had the markings on it weren't sufficient to avoid suspicion. So in the coming months, I hope we'll work with our Community Engagement Committee on how to best continue this discussion. It's said that as policymakers, we have to stop talking and start doing, but first as a community, we have to listen to each other. So this is our opportunity to hear from the chief about how we have been making tremendous strides, particularly since our policy review in 2018 on progressing towards the commitments that many police departments in this country apparently haven't even begun to meet. So I'd like to turn the floor over to the chief and basically ask us all to start thinking about how we can better engage our community on diversity and inclusion. Chief, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Our department and police officers pride themselves on being positive members of the Mount Prospect community. Preventing the criminal tragedy of what occurred in Minneapolis starts with good hiring practices. We do everything in our power to hire compassionate guardians of our community. I personally, along with one of my command staff, participated in the interview process along with the Fire Commission. We, similar to all professional departments, do an extensive background, polygraph, and psychological evaluation on all our applicants. Upon hire after the academy, our officers are held to the highest of standards in treating people in our community with respect and dignity. Our policies and procedures are created and vetted through a nationally renowned firm called Lexipol. They continue to update us on legislative changes, court decisions, and the nation's best practices. This company is so well respected that our risk management firm, IRMA, provides annual discounts for us being members. Having good policies is only part of the picture. You must have a system in place to ensure that they're followed. We have a full-time civilian who reviews all our in-car camera videos daily, looking for violations of policy and any potential training issues. We also have an early warning system in place called Guardian Tracking that supervisors are required to make entry into of all their subordinates. The system has triggering mechanisms in place that require a review and intervention by command staff. The department does not presently possess body cameras. If you recall last year, and in the budget, you approved new car in cameras, which we will be installing in the next couple of months. It takes a little bit of time getting them in the cars. We purposely purchased a system with a good body cam platform that integrates well with the in-car system. You will see the recommendation to purchase those body cams in our upcoming CIP budget. Regarding the 8 can't wait reform items raised by the Houston mayor last week, we have been meeting all of them for some time. The banning of chokeholds and strangleholds. Chokeholds are permitted by state statute as well as department policy unless deadly force is justified. The requirement to de-escalation.
Excuse me, Chief, I believe you misspoke. They are not permitted.
They're permitted for deadly force when deadly force is justified.
Right, I think you said they are, well, they are not permitted except for.
I'm sorry, prohibited, you're right. Yes, they're prohibited unless deadly force is justified. Required de-escalation. 88% of our officers are certified in crisis intervention training. CIT training curriculum encompasses mental health awareness, elderly aging issues, adolescent disorders, de-escalation strategies, as well as scenario-based training covering de-escalation strategies and mental health awareness. The 12% of our department who has not attended the CIT certification training has not met the minimum requirement of time as a certified police officer set by the Illinois Training and Standards Board. Once that service time has been met, those remaining officers will attend the training certification courses as they become available. Through the Police Law Institute, all officers are receiving implicit bias and cultural competency training as well. The requiring of warning before shooting. Our officers are trained to give a verbal warning prior to the use of deadly force where feasible. This is reinforced at every in-house firearms training session and when the use of force law and department policy is reviewed. Exhaust all other means before shooting. Department policy in Illinois state statute states officers shall use only the amount of force that reasonably appears necessary given the facts and circumstances perceived by the officer at the time of the event to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement purpose. The reasonableness of force will be judged by the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene at the time of the incident. When determining whether to apply force and evaluating whether an officer has used reasonable force, a number of factors should be taken into consideration. There are 17 factors. In the interest of time, I won't list them here. Require officers to intervene and stop excessive force by other officers. Department policy includes a duty to intercede. It states any officer present and observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond that which is objectively reasonable under the circumstances shall intercede.
Don, could you get closer to your mic?
Reasonable under the circumstances shall intercede to prevent the use of unreasonable force. An officer who observes another employee use force that exceeds the degree of force permitted by law should promptly report these observations to a supervisor. Ban shooting at moving vehicles. Our policy states officers should move out of the path of approaching vehicle instead of discharging their firearm at the vehicle or any of its occupants. An officer should only discharge a firearm in a moving vehicle or its occupants when the officer reasonably believes there are no other reasonable means available to avert the threat of the vehicle or if deadly force other than the vehicle is directed at the officer or others. Require use of force continuum. The use of force continuum is no longer the gold standard and has been replaced with the objective reasonable standard, which I briefly described above. This is due to the United States Supreme Court decision in Graham versus Connor. Require comprehensive reporting. Department policy states all reports shall accurately reflect the identity of the persons involved, all pertinent information seen, heard, or assimilated by any other sense, and any actions taken. Employees shall not suppress, conceal, or distort the facts of any reported incident, nor shall an employee make a false report orally or in writing. Any use of force by a member of this department shall be documented promptly, completely, and accurately in the appropriate report. The officer should articulate the factors perceived and why he or she believes the use of force was reasonable under the circumstances. All use of force incidents are reviewed by command staff, including myself, to ensure that they are within policy. In closing, we recruit well. We vet our applicants as good as anyone and train constantly. We hire human beings with a kind heart, a good sense of ethics, who are courageous, willing to fight hard, even get hurt for you. They struggle sometimes, get better with time and experience, and sometimes have setbacks. What they can never be is perfect. In fact, you can break perfectly good human beings by insisting they be something they can never be, or by blaming them for the sins of another who has also been dressed in blue. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. It's a lot that's there. Those 8 points covered a lot of ground. But I think what's important for us to recognize is that in all 8 of those areas, we have made proactive and constructive strides. I think we've all been to various swearing-in ceremonies and been impressed with the credentials of our young police force hires coming into the job. I think we've all been very impressed with the work of our Board of Fire and Police Commissioners on the interviewing that they do, the screening that they do, and the psychological testing that needs to be done. So we're never done with improving ourselves, with improving our force, but I believe we're starting from a better place than some people might think that we are. For me, it was important at this time to get this information out there on the record. There it is. And I don't know that we necessarily need a discussion at this point in time. But if there is any comments to be made, raise your hand. Okay, I think the words speak for themselves. The service of our officers speak for itself, as well as the service of our BOFPC. So as I indicated, we'll continue to work on how to engage with the community, to also continue to improve the efforts of our police force. Okay.